The man you are currently seeing had a crucial role in the history of the 20th century, although his name has fallen into oblivion. This is Joseph Malta, and he was responsible for adjusting the noose around the necks of the Nazis condemned to death in the Nuremberg trials. And believe it or not, he may have been responsible for allowing one of the most brutal Nazi leaders to escape justice. Today, in this new episode, we will tell you everything about this controversial American executioner and the hangings of the condemned Nazis in Nuremberg. Joseph Malta was born on November 27, 1918 in Suffolk County, United States. The details of his personal life are a genuine mystery, so very little is known about him. We know that when he was young, he worked as a floor sander. Years later, when he reached adulthood, he joined the military police of the U.S. Army. This force is responsible for maintaining order and security among the troops. They conduct investigations into crimes committed within military establishments and among soldiers. At the same time, they are occasionally assigned tasks related to the administration of prisons for prisoners of war and the custody of elderly officers. During the war, military police are not sent to the front lines, but are used to defend the rear. Due to its location, this area is often one of the weak points of any army, so protecting it is a fundamental task. Otherwise, a surprise attack can put an end to the general's ambitions. Here you can see a member of this organization talking about the profession today.
My name is Specialist Ryan Wilson. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, with the 1139th here at Camp John. I'm a military police officer here. Our job, it really entitles a lot. We have to be the first line of safety for everybody, and also just being here for the community. If somebody has a question, if they need anything, just being here. We're not just soldiers, we're also police officers, so we have to do more in a sense.
However, military police are more known among the troops for catching deserters, that is, men who try to escape from the battlefield and leave their comrades to their fate. This is why military police are viewed with a mix of respect and resentment by the rest of the troops. Soldiers know that there is a possibility that these allies may turn into enemies, trying to catch them at any moment. It is very likely that Joseph Malta's comrades thought this about him. In any case, in 1946, our protagonist decided to change his profession and dedicate himself to something very different. The timing was not coincidental, as that was the year when the leaders of the Third Reich were sentenced to death. Between November 1945 and October 1946, the International Military Tribunal, formed by the victorious powers, remained in session to judge the Nazis' leaders for their crimes. Of course, this was not an easy task, starting with the fact that the top representatives of National Socialism, such as Adolf Hitler or Joseph Goebbels, had committed suicide. Others, like Joseph Mengele, the abominable scientist who conducted horrific medical experiments in concentration camps, had escaped. However, of course, there were still many Nazis with inhumane crimes to be judged. Therefore, ministers, businessmen, military leaders, and the most important propagandists who had survived the Nazi Empire's downfall were brought to the stand. Some of them had gained international fame in previous years, as was the case with Joachim von Ribbentrop, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Third Reich who had orchestrated the controversial Non-Aggression Pact between Germany and the Soviet Union, signed in 1939. Others, on the other hand, were relatively obscure figures who had never been at the center of the stage, but whose crimes were equally inhumane, such as Fritz Sauckel, the Nazi leader in charge of implementing the forced labor program for dictatorship prisoners. The defense of the accused was truly despicable. They claimed ignorance of the existence of concentration camps and that the Holocaust had been planned solely by Hitler. However, it was impossible for the Third Reich to implement a system of mass killing without the consent, or at least the knowledge of any of them. They were part of the Nazi bureaucracy, as well as members of the Führer's inner circle. The strategy of pretending ignorance about the horror of those years was a resounding failure, as it was completely demolished by the prosecutors. On October 1, 1946, the International Military Tribunal rendered its verdict. Out of a total of 22 accused, 12 were sentenced to death, 7 were sent to prison, and 3 escaped punishment after a lengthy debate among the judges. The verdict was final, and the punishment for some of the most monstrous criminals in history was already determined, as you can see in this news report.
This is what awaits Goering, Keitel, Rosenberg, and the other apostles of death and hate, the only conceivable end for these merchants of aggression. And as they plunge the world into a bloodbath, it is fitting that they take their final plunge in ignominy.
The date of the Nuremberg trial executions was set for October 16th of the same year, and was entrusted to the United States Army. The Americans announced that they were accepting volunteers to oversee the hangings. Historically, the profession of executioner has been considered gruesome and macabre, a job reserved for people who have no qualms about taking the life of someone judged guilty and who are not impressed by seeing death up close. Men with the necessary temperament to ignore the tears of a death row convict are few. However, it seems that Joseph Malta was one of them, as he volunteered as soon as he heard about the search. At that time, he was a 28-year-old military policeman stationed in Germany, maintaining order among the U.S. occupying forces. 50 years later, in an interview, our protagonist would say the following: "When I was in Germany, when I talked to people and found out what had happened, it was easy for me to make the decision. It was something I had to do." It is clear that Malta was a laconic, direct, and few-worded man. For him, the Nazis were the worst criminals of humanity and had to pay for their sins. Once accepted by the army, our protagonist met Sergeant John Clarence Woods, who would be his partner in overseeing the hangings. Woods had joined the U.S. Armed Forces 3 years earlier, although it soon became clear that he lacked talent and would never achieve military glory. For this reason, in 1944, he volunteered to be the official hangman for executions ordered by senior U.S. commanders. He claimed to have prior experience, which was a blatant lie. The sergeant had never seen an electric chair or a gallows, but none of this prevented him from being hired. 2 years later, he volunteered to participate in the Nuremberg punishments. He was aware that this would make him go down in history as the man who killed the top brass of Nazism, so he did not hesitate to seize the opportunity. There is nothing documenting the relationship between the two executioners. Everything indicates that they shared the same opinion about the Third Reich leaders and did not feel sorry for their fate. Beyond that, it is unlikely that they were close friends. Everyone who knew Sergeant Woods remembers him as an unpleasant man, with little personal hygiene and an aggressive character. Anyway, now they were partners and were obliged to work together if they wanted their task to be successful. Before the hangings, Malta had the opportunity to tour the prison where the Nazi leaders were held. On that occasion, he had a mysterious encounter with Hermann Goering, one of the main accused and the former commander-in-chief of the German Luftwaffe. The American executioner remembers him as follows: "He behaved as if he were in charge. He told us we had wasted a lot of time. I told him it was because the procedure had to be done according to the law. He told me, when it's time to take me, I'll already be dead." Although neither Malta nor the rest of his captors took him seriously, those words turned out to be prophetic, as the day before the executions, Goering committed suicide by ingesting a cyanide capsule. Currently, it remains a mystery how the Nazi leader obtained the poison, although it is suspected that it was administered by a corrupt prison guard. Here you can see a recreation of his death.
¡Traigan un médico! ¡Traigan un médico!
While it may seem suspicious that Malta did not inform his superiors about Goering's strange warning, it is most likely that he believed it was an insignificant bravado. In any case, the Allies paid a high cost for the executioner's naivety, as one of the top criminals of the Third Reich managed to escape justice. Fortunately for Malta, he was not punished for not reporting the words of the former commander of the Luftwaffe. To avoid further complications, the day after the suicide, the gallows were set up in the courtyard of Nuremberg prison. Malta himself designed the trapdoor in the floor so that once opened and the condemned was hanged, it would not bounce back and hit his head. In this type of hanging executions, the long drop method was usually used. Its peculiarity was that the height and weight of the person were accurately calculated, and then a rope of the precise length was assigned. It should neither be too long nor too short, so that the victim's neck would break instantly and they would not suffer a gruesome death by strangulation. However, Sergeant Woods had an unpleasant surprise prepared for the Nazis. He deliberately prepared ropes that were too short so that their suffering would be prolonged for minutes. It is unknown for certain whether Malta was aware of this, although it is very likely that he knew and chose not to say anything about it. The first to ascend the gallows was Joachim von Ribbentrop, who, as mentioned earlier, was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Third Reich. He showed no remorse for his actions, but rather the opposite. Some of his last words were, "Even now, knowing the whole truth of what happened, if Hitler appeared in my cell and gave me an order, I would fulfill it without hesitation." After the rope broke his neck, it was Wilhelm Keitel's turn, the commander of the German armed forces. He had requested to be executed by a firing squad, but his request was rejected, and he was sent to the gallows as befitting a war criminal. Although Malta had designed the gallows trapdoor to avoid hitting the condemned, Keitel was a hefty man, and as he fell through the hole, he smashed his head on the wood. The Nazi bled to death at the same time the rope strangled him. The next to die were the leaders Ernst Kaltenbrunner, Alfred Rosenberg, Hans Frank, Wilhelm Frick, Julius Streicher, Fritz Sauckel, Alfred Jodl, and Arthur Seyss-Inquart. The most dramatic death was that of Streicher, who had directed the Der Stürmer newspaper and spread racism and hatred toward Jews through its pages. Here you can see the moment when his sentence was read.
Streicher had charge of the Jewish boycott of April the 1st, 1933. He advocated the Nuremberg decrees of 1935. He was responsible for the demolition on August 10th, 1938 of the synagogue in Nuremberg. And on November the 10th, 1938, he spoke publicly in support of the Jewish pogrom, which was taking place at that time.
As he was led to the gallows, Streicher shouted a defiant "Heil Hitler!" and spat in Joseph Malta's face. When the mechanism was activated and he plunged through the trapdoor, he did not die immediately but began to suffocate. To expedite the process, Malta had to take him by the legs and pull downward until the rope broke his neck. In total, the executions lasted less than an hour and a half. They ended before 3 in the morning, and witnesses agreed that, despite the clumsiness, they were an act of justice. Joseph Malta's military career ended shortly after the Nuremberg executions. In 1947, he left the army and resumed his job as a floor sander. On the other hand, John Clarence Woods continued to serve in the U.S. 7th Engineer Brigade in the Marshall Islands, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. On July 21, 1950, he was electrocuted while trying to fix a set of lights. During the following decades, Malta maintained a low-profile life and rarely gave interviews. In the last one, in 1996, he was asked how it felt to have supervised the death of the Third Reich's top leadership. The former executioner did not hesitate and said the following: "It was a pleasure. If I could, I would do it again." Finally, Malta died on January 6, 1999, at the age of 80. As you can see in this image, until his last days, he kept a miniature replica of the gallows where the leaders of Nazism were hanged. We've reached the end of the video. Leave your comments in the box below and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.